type of thing. All right, the second one that we're going to look at is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is extremely important. Nitrogen is used by organisms to create amino acids and proteins, DNA, that type of thing. So it's important that we understand the nitrogen cycle because that is a big component as well. It's naturally occurring, again, nitrogen, naturally occurring gas in the atmosphere, makes up 78% of the atmosphere. So it's a major component. There's two different things that we'll look at, nitrogen fixation and denitrification. So again, when we think about the cycle and the different ways that nitrogen is going to be out there, in nitrogen fixation, the process of converting natural gas to ammonia in the soil, and this is done by bacteria. The denitrification is when bacteria in the soil convert nitrates back to nitrogen gas, and this releases nitrogen kind of back into the atmosphere again. Alright, so here is a graphic of our nitrogen cycle here, and just a little information on this. Even though nitrogen is readily occurring in the atmosphere, because of the structure of nitrogen, it's really hard to get nitrogen in a usable form. Because what happens is nitrogen is really happy, it's triple bonded to itself. And then we get these handy dandy little electrons there. So because of the strength of that bond, it's really hard to break that. So things that are going to actually be able to break that, or lightning, also volcanic, so I'm going to draw my volcano. Again, eruptions are going to do that. And then also certain bacteria. So we have our nitrifying algae that are going to help with that. So we still have this cycle here, and again, the main part is that it's needed for amino acids, so there has to be this way to break it down. Obviously, nitrogen and the nitrogen cycle, nitrogen is used for a lot of different things, man-made things, so we also have that human component in this. Alright, and the third cycle we're going to cover is the phosphorus cycle. Again, this is important because it is required for DNA and RNA, and that's why we're going to take a look at it. The key thing about the phosphorus cycle is, unlike carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus does not enter the atmosphere. It remains locked mostly in soils and rocks and is going to cycle between organisms and the soil themselves. Organic phosphate moves through the food web until it is returned in the soil. So if we take a look at here, so there's different things. We can have it in the rocks or the soil, and then because of erosion, that type of thing, is going to enter the water system. It's also in animals, and that's going to just kind of fall into this realm in here. So kind of a little bit different in the cycle, in the manner that it does not enter the atmosphere. Two more things I'm going to discuss briefly. Nutrient limitation. Again, because these are all the cycles that we're talking about. We talked about the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. There are certain limits to amount that there is, and the form and how usable it is to organisms. So primary productivity is the rate at which matter is created by primary producers. So we think back to that kind of first trophic level. Primary producers. Limiting nutrient is a nutrient that limits the growth of these primary producers in an ecosystem. So there's specific things that they need to be able to grow and produce, and the limiting nutrient is the thing that is going to limit that amount of growth. Algal bloom All right, so because we're dealing with things in cycles and things will depend on how the form that either carbon, nitrogen, or phosphorus is, where it's located, that type of thing, there can be some limitations. So if we go back to this idea of primary productivity, so this involves the rate at which matter is created by primary producers. So we go back to that first trophic level in those primary producers. So they have a productivity level, and that's based on kind of the nutrients that they get. So if they aren't getting enough of the nutrients, the nutrient that is lacking is going to be considered the limiting nutrient, and this is going to limit the growth by the primary producers in an ecosystem. So again, this can have problems when we look back to our food chains, food webs, ecological pyramids. Those producers, which we need the most of, there's issues there. It's going to wreak havoc on the rest of the ecosystem. So you can have something that could limit the productivity, and you can have something that there's maybe too much of the nutrients, and you can also have adverse side effects. So oftentimes in aquatic ecosystems, if there's a lot of this limiting nutrient, so runoff from like heavily fertilized fields, lots of times farmers are going to put some type of ammonia or nitrogen containing compound into the soil, and if there is so much of this, it can produce a lot of this different algae that's set to break it down, and you can get algal blooms, and this is when runoff from fertilized fields reaches a body of water caused by an increase in their limiting nutrient to the ecosystem. And if I go to the next slide, we'll see what happens. So again, you can get something like this that can really affect the ecosystem, because again, fish are different populations that are going to require oxygen and different things. This entire thing here is not going to work for them. So you can have some adverse side effects when you have too much of the limiting nutrient as well. This ends chapter 3.